Hello and welcome back to Huddle Up, the show that talks all things football. I'm Thomas Pocrnic, as always, joined by Luca Celebre. Luca, we're 3 weeks into the CFL season. A third of the league is undefeated. A third of the league is winless. But it's been a great season so far with a ton of surprises. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, and I think that every game, for the most part, has been close. Like, finishes have been incredible to these games. You've got the teams in the middle of the pack that we are not going to talk about. So if your team is 1-1 or 2-1, BC Lions fans, we're looking at you. You're not going to get a lot of love this show, but it's okay. It's okay. We want to talk about winless teams and undefeated teams. Do you want to start with winless teams?
Yeah, they're all kind of in a weird spot because some of these teams haven't won a game clearly, but I feel like at times, like the Edmonton Elks are a prime example. You kind of feel good about some of their performances, but they just haven't gotten over the line. But I think the big question we want to answer is, which of these teams do you have the most confidence in turning it around, in righting the ship? The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, which are probably the biggest surprise out of these three. The Edmonton Elks, like I said, have been better, but just not quite there. And then the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who maybe out of the three feel the worst. But I don't know. I'm going to let you answer the question.
Oh, man. I think Hamilton, you're right. If we want to start there and eliminate one of these teams to feel the best about going forward, Hamilton's probably the one that we feel the worst about. And when we did our preseason predictions and rankings, we had Hamilton pretty far down. I think we were excited about what they could be if Bo Levi-Mitchell was back to MOP Bo Levi-Mitchell, but he just hasn't been. And I don't think it's necessarily all on him. I think the offensive skill position guys around him have been up and down so far. Like, he's thrown 5 interceptions, but you can blame some of them on him. You can blame some of them on his receivers at times as well. The Tim White one against Saskatchewan is a perfect example of that. I just think that when you look at the East and the Argos and the start that they got off to this year, being 2-0 and undefeated, yes, 0-3 is not an insurmountable thing to kind of claw your way out of, but at the same time, I think that I trust Ottawa and Montreal and Toronto a lot more than I do Hamilton. And so if you're the 4th best team in that division, even if you do start having some better games, I like all those other teams a little bit more.
I think when you're looking at the Hamilton Tiger Cats as well, when we talked about them preseason, it was about you can somewhat see the ceiling with this team, but you're going to need to see it first. But in particular, we talked about this dynamic duo that they have on offense in James Butler and Tim White, and we just have not seen the best of them. James Butler on that side, he's been very efficient and good with the ball in his hands. They just can't get him the ball enough. Tim White, on the other hand, has had a very slow start to the season. He's got 10 catches, just a little over 100 yards. He's had some drop issues. I think both of these guys are going to get on the right track. I mean, James Butler, I think it's a little bit unfair to say that he's had a poor start. It's just about sort of the scheme and the situation that they've been in a lot of these football games. They have not been able to get him those big performances so far. But I think we'll start to see a little bit better play from these two in particular, and that will hopefully turn out to getting them to win some games. But like you said, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, for sure. And I think on the James Butler note too, maybe that is something they look at, especially over the past 2 weeks. Like, he had 9 rushing attempts in the latest loss to Saskatchewan. Maybe deserves a bit more of a look as far as your offensive game plan, your offensive identity. I know Bo Levi-Mitchell is an amazing player. He's had his moments in the past, and I don't think he's been particularly bad this season. Like, I think he's bounced back in a way where he's answered some questions about if he can still be that guy. He's had some pretty solid performances despite the losses so far this season, but maybe running that offense through James Butler a little more is going to just alleviate some of that pressure from Bo and make things easier for everyone on offense.
All right, let's talk about the Edmonton Elks, because they created a lot of waves over a very busy offseason, bringing in McLeod Bethel-Thompson, and they were kind of a team where you didn't exactly know what the expectation was. We hoped that they were going to be better. We didn't know if it was going to exactly result in a ton more wins than they had a year ago. Through 3 weeks, McLeod Bethel-Thompson, he's been all right. But they're sitting at 0-3 with a point differential of just -14. Is it a concern that they haven't been able to get it done, or are you optimistic that eventually this will turn into some more wins?
It sucks because I feel like it's almost the same old song and dance with this Edmonton Elks team year after year, where it's been bad start after bad start after bad start, and it is hard to climb out of that hole. But that said, I feel good about them. I don't know. Watching them, McLeod Bethel-Thompson, second in the league in passing yards. He's He took a year off of the CFL after winning the Grey Cup with the Argos. And so for him to come back, new offense, new team, new coach, new scheme, and look this comfortable early on, especially getting some chemistry with his new weapons and Dylan Mitchell, who's having a great season, Eugene Lewis, and Curly Giddens Jr., who he has experience with. I think that receiving core looks outstanding. Might just be a defensive side of the ball thing that we're not 100% confident in, but I think going into the season, that's kind of where we were with this team. So I feel confident in them winning some of these closer games because I think McLeod Bethel-Thompson has that experience. And maybe if it was Trey Ford leading the way right now, they were 0-3 and the margin of victory was smaller, I could understand it a little more as far as, yeah, maybe they're going to have these growing pains throughout the season because Trey Ford is still finding a way to be a leader, finding a way to win tight games. McLeod Bethel-Thompson has been there. I think it's only a matter of time before they turn that around. Do you agree?
They just got to learn to play a complete, full 4 quarters of football because every single game they look good at times, but there's just these small moments, these little mental errors that are ultimately resulting in them not being able to get a win. So it's frustrating, but we mentioned right off the top of the show, it feels like every single game this year in the CFL has been so close. The margins are so thin. I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is and say that they're going to be on the other side of these close games eventually, and maybe they rip off 3 close wins in a row, and you know, through 6 weeks, we're sitting at 500, and you feel really, really good about this team. It's still early. It's encouraging what they're doing. I think this organization is going in a positive direction, and I'm not fully pushing the panic button on the Edmonton Elks, even though they have a lot of ground to make up on some of their rivals in their division.
For sure. And I think if this was an 0-3 start where McLeod Bethel-Thompson wasn't playing well, the touchdown to interception ratio was maybe something like 2-5 through 3 games.
Yeah.
You're feeling a lot worse and wondering why they even did this and kind of stymied Trey Ford's development. But you look at it and you're like, okay, I can't really argue with the fact that they went this way maybe if they want to give Trey Ford some more time. Bethel-Thompson looks good. I think he's only going to get better. That leads us to Winnipeg, though. And this is the most surprising 0-3 team that we could see. They haven't been 0-3 in a season since 2012, which was a long, long, long time ago. When Zach Collaros became the full-time starter for this team the last 3 seasons, they haven't lost more than 1 home game. So what is going on, and are we confident in them?
Zach Collaros has not thrown a touchdown pass in 5 games dating back to the West final of last season. That is an insane stat for a team that is this loaded on offense. In fact, they're so good that you and I sat here just 3 weeks ago and said that they're probably the best team in the CFL. Looking at the offseason that they had, looking at the injuries that they've had now, you kind of understand a bit of early season rust, but also a lot of the numbers that you just rolled off are pointing to maybe this is the end of a dynasty. I don't know. Is it just that early season struggle and, 10 weeks from now when they're 7-3 or 6-4, we can all laugh at it and say, remember when we were worried about the Blue Bombers? Or is there a legit concern here? Because Zach Collaros has not looked great so far. Dalton Schoen has not been able to get going. Brady Oliveira's been injured, but when he's been in there, he hasn't maybe looked as explosive or as dynamic as he has in past years. I don't know. I'm not ready to give up on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers yet. I still have a lot of confidence in them, but I feel like there's, especially when you have expectations as high as this team, the clock is ticking, and I think there needs to be a bit more urgency in that locker room and in that organization right now.
And I think if you're on the side of the Blue Bombers are going to turn this around, you can point to their point differential as well because they've been in 3 close games so far this season. Maybe the Montreal, the opening week one wasn't as close, but the Ottawa one came right down to the wire this past week against BC is a 2-point loss. So it's not like they're getting blown out. They have a foundation that they can lean on and rely on. And so I think that's part of the reason why it's so surprising that they're 0-3 because nothing really has changed, especially on offense. But at the same time, that's the reason why you're confident in this team going forward because nothing has changed. Like these guys are still there. They're still elite playmakers. Maybe they've lost a step over the years as they get older as far as like Kenny Lawler goes and Zach Collaros goes, but it doesn't seem that way. It just might seem, like you said, some early season struggles and maybe when they get a more favorable matchup, like they've had a tough start to the season, a Grey Cup rematch with Montreal. BC has played them tough every single year. They're the other team in the West that I think we feel the most confident about. And then Ottawa's home opener. I think
Drew
Ottawa
Brown
was an upstart team, and Drew Brown wanting to stick it to his old team. So maybe they just need that get-right game against Appalachian State, as Adam Sandler said in The Longest Yard, you know?
You can point to their schedule, and it has been tough, but with how every team has performed, I'm struggling to look at their upcoming schedule and say, like, that's an absolute lock to be a win, because every single game this year feels like either team can come out with the win. It's been such a good start to the season, maybe for us as fans, not for the teams that we just spoke about that are 0-3, but there's a lot of time left. They can turn around. When we come back, we're going to look to the other side, talk about the undefeated teams and who's caught our attention.